Whatever was moving through the countryside, it wasn't behaving like any animal they knew. It ignored the livestock. It appeared in daylight. And for some reason, it went after people, again and again.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Have you ever been stuck on a weight loss plateau, trying everything and anything you can to lose that extra weight and reach peak health? We've all been there, but Noom's unlocked the secret to reaching the mountaintop. Go in micro. The Noom GLP-1 microdose program starts at $79 and is delivered to your door in 7 days. Start your microdose GLP-1 journey today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Noom. Micro changes, big results. Initial 3-week subscription and 4 weeks of medication from $79 plus tax and $179 per month plus tax for 12-week subscription thereafter. Final pricing depends on program selection. Noom GLP-1 RX program involves healthy diet, exercise, and support. Individual results may vary. Meds and personalization based on clinical need. Not reviewed by FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality. No affiliation with Novo Nordisk Inc., the only U.S. source of FDA-approved semaglutide. Not available in all 50 U.S. states.
Youth mental health is a complex challenge that requires comprehensive solutions. We must strengthen after-school programs. We must make digital literacy tools available in our schools. We must work with mental health professionals to support children. And we must empower mentors, educators, and parents to keep kids happy. Learn more about our commitment to finding lasting solutions at empowerourfuturecoalition.com/solutions. Paid for by the Coalition to Empower Our Future.
Ready for the best summer ever? ID Tech is the original and most trusted tech camp for kids, ages 7 to 17, offering over 50 epic courses like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, AI and machine learning, and more. Camps are all about high-energy fun, new friends, trusted instructors, and exclusive tech partnerships. Experience ID Tech at 75 college campuses nationwide. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Youth mental health is a complex challenge that requires comprehensive solutions. We must strengthen after-school programs. We must make digital literacy tools available in our schools. We must work with mental health professionals to support children. And we must empower mentors, educators, and parents to keep kids happy. Learn more about our commitment to finding lasting solutions at empowerourfuturecoalition.com/solutions. Paid for by the Coalition to Empower Our Future.
Hello, I'm Sarah, and welcome to the Whispering Woods After Dark. We'll get straight into it. Are you ready for the story? The first thing they noticed was not the blood, but the silence that seemed to settle unnaturally over the land. It was not the ordinary quiet of the countryside, nor the soft hush that drifts across fields at dusk, when the wind drops and the animals settle. It's something heavier than that. Something that pressed in from all sides and made even the smallest movement feel like a disturbance. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, that sharpens every sound until it feels like a warning. Adele had been tending cattle near the forest edge, not far from the slopes that dipped into the Mercois River. It was late morning, and the sun had already burned the mist from the grass, leaving the land open and exposed, with nothing hidden and nowhere for anything large to conceal itself. There was no deep shadows, no cover, nothing that suggested danger could approach. And yet, whatever came for her did not seem to need it. When they found her, there was no clear sign of struggle in the way one might expect. No scattered footprints that told a coherent story. No obvious trail leading back into the trees. What remained was simply the aftermath. Sudden, violent, and final in a way that resisted easy explanation. That was June of 1764, and it did not stop there. At first, people spoke about it in a way they always had, reaching for the simplest explanation available to them. They said it was a wolf, because that was the word that fit the land, the forests, and the long history of predators moving along the edges of human life in rural France. Wolves had always been there, slipping between farms, watching from the tree line, waiting for something smaller, weaker, or alone. But this did not behave like a wolf, because even dangerous wolves did not usually walk into open fields in broad daylight and choose a human being when easier prey stood only a few feet away. And they certainly did not return, again and again, with the same pattern, that same boldness and the same apparent lack of fear. The attack spread quickly across the region of Gévaudan, a rugged and sparsely populated landscape that today overlaps with Lisieux and parts of Port-Laure. At the time, it was made up of a scattering of farms, small parishes, and long distances between neighbours, where children and women often worked alone, guarding livestock. That made them vulnerable. But vulnerability alone did not explain what was happening. What made this different? What caused it to linger, to spread, and eventually to reach beyond the villages into national attention? Was the pattern that began to emerge. The victims were not being taken at night or deep within the forest, but in daylight, in open ground. These were places where people could see for miles, and yet the attacks still occurred with alarming regularity. Those who survived, though few, began to describe what they had seen, and their accounts carried a strange consistency despite their hesitation. They said it looked like a wolf, but not entirely, as though something about it did not resolve properly when they tried to recall it. Some described it as longer than expected, its body stretched and low to the ground in a way that did not match the animals they were familiar with. Others spoke of its colouring, which seemed unusual, with reddish or grey tones and darker markings running along its back, and of a head that appeared too large, with jaws that seemed disproportionate. More unsettling than its appearance, however, was its behaviour. It did not move like something that was afraid of humans. Instead, it approached directly, choosing its moment with a kind of deliberation that suggested something beyond instinct. And when it attacked, it did so with a precision that left people struggling to describe what they had experienced. Reports of the injuries it caused began to form their own pattern, with some accounts describing wounds that seemed excessive, even for a predator. suggesting not only feeding, but something more targeted. Among the most disturbing details were claims that some victims had been found decapitated, a detail that may have been shaped by retelling, but nevertheless carried enormous weight within the community. Whether every account was accurate or not, the belief that they were became central to the story, and in a place like Gévaudan in the 1760s, belief was as often as powerful as fact. As the months passed and the seasons changed, the story began to move beyond the immediate region, carried first by word of mouth and then by letters and official reports that eventually reached the press. As it travelled, the language surrounding it began to change, transforming what had once been described as a wolf into something far less defined. It became a bête féroce, a ferocious beast, something unnamed and unknown that did not seem to belong to the landscape it inhabited. Newspapers began to publish descriptions, describing an animal with a long tail and unusually large claws, a creature marked by a dark stripe along its back, moving with a speed and purpose that felt almost deliberate. Some reports went further still, comparing it to animals that did not exist in France at all, suggesting it resembled a hyena or a panther, an exotic and misplaced predator somehow wandering through rural Europe. And yet even these comparisons failed to fully explain what people were experiencing. Because whatever it was, it continued to behave in a way that remained consistent. It ignored livestock. It went for people. That detail, more than anything else, began to shift the tone of the story into something darker, because it contradicted what people understood about predators. A starving animal will take what it can get, and a wolf will typically go for a sheep, cattle, or any prey that presents less risk than a human being. But this creature appeared to move through herds without hesitation, bypassing animals that should have been easier targets, in order to reach something far more dangerous. That was the moment when fear began to change, shifting from concern into something deeper and more difficult to define. By early 1765, the situation had escalated beyond what could be handled locally. Farmers had tried to track it, and hunters had gone out with muskets and dogs, searching the forest and fields with increasing urgency. Some claimed to have seen it clearly, to have had it within range, and to have fired shots that should have been decisive. And more than one of them returned with the same account, describing how they had hit the animal, seen the impact, and yet watched as it continued moving before disappearing back into the landscape. That detail spread quickly, not just because of what it suggested about the creature itself, not because of what it implied about the limits of those trying to stop it. If the animal could survive being shot, if it could endure what should have ended it, then it was no longer simply dangerous. It was something that could not be easily controlled. At that point, the French crown became involved, sending officials and professional hunters into the region, men whose role was to deal with wolves and bring an end to threats like this before they grew into something larger. But by then, it already had. What had begun as a series of attacks had become a story, and not just a local one, but a national narrative that was being shaped and reshaped with every report. And stories like that are difficult to contain, especially when they refuse to end. Because even after organised hunts began, even after large wolves were killed, and displayed as proof that the threat had been dealt with, the attacks continued, leaving people with a question that no official statement could answer. If the beast was dead, then what was still out there? That was when the whispers began, spoken between neighbours and families who had seen too much to accept simple explanations any longer. Some believed there were multiple animals moving through the region, their actions blending together into a single narrative that had grown larger than any one encounter. Others disagreed, arguing that the behaviour was too consistent to be explained by separate creatures acting independently. There was a sense, difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore, that whatever this was, it understood something about the people it hunted. Because it avoided traps, it slipped past hunters. It appeared in places it should not have been able to reach so quickly. And at times, it seemed to know exactly when someone would be alone. That was when the explanations began to shift again, moving beyond the idea of a wild animal into something far less comfortable. Some began to wonder whether it had been trained, whether it was controlled, whether it had been sent. And beneath those ideas, quieter but more persistent, were older words that had existed long before these events, drawn from a deeper cultural memory. Luke Garou, the wolf that is not only a wolf. By the time the Crown finally intervened, something in the countryside had already shifted in a way that could not easily be undone. It was no longer just fear that shaped daily life, but expectation, a quiet, persistent awareness that something could happen at any moment, even in places that had once felt safe. People began to move differently, weighing decisions that had once been instinctive, and children were no longer sent out alone. Paths that had once been routine became calculated risks. And even in daylight, in open ground, where danger should have been visible long before it arrived, there was the growing sense that something could be watching. And despite all of this, the attacks did not stop. The first organised hunts were carried out by the people who knew the land best, men who had spent their lives moving through the forests and fields, and who understood how wolves behaved, where they sheltered, and how they hunted. Farmers, woodsmen, and local hunters formed groups and moved together through the terrain, bringing dogs, muskets, and whatever tools they had in hand, pushing into the tree lines in long, uneven sweeps, in an attempt to drive the animal into the open. They found tracks, and they found signs that something large had passed through, but they did not find the creature itself, or if they did, they failed to stop it. What began to emerge from these early encounters was not simply a pattern of failure, but a pattern of stories that followed the same unsettling structure. Hunters returned describing moments where they had come close, where they had seen the animal clearly enough to take a shot, and where they were certain they had struck it. One man described how the creature broke from the brush, low and fast, its movement unmistakable, and how he raised his musket, fired, and saw the impact as it stumbled before regaining its footing and disappearing back into the trees. Others told similar accounts, each one echoing the last with small variations, but the same outcome, describing clean shots, clear hits, and the absence of a body. At first, these reports were dismissed, in the way such claims often are, attributed to poor aim, exaggeration, or the natural instinct to explain failure in a way that preserved pride. But as more of these accounts surfaced, and as they began to align in their details, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the possibility that something unusual was happening. By early 1765, the situation had grown too insignificant to remain a local concern, and what had once been a regional problem had begun to take on the shape of a national crisis. Reports of the attacks were circulating beyond Gévaudan, carried through newspapers that thrived on stories of this nature, stories that could be retold and reshaped with each publication. The idea of a single beast moving through the countryside, evading hunters, ignoring livestock, and killing people in broad daylight was too compelling to remain contained, and so the king intervened. Professional wolf hunters were sent into the region, men whose entire lives had been dedicated to tracking and killing animals, far more elusive than anything the local farmers had encountered. Among them were the Gévaudan family, experienced and methodical, brought in with the expectation that they would resolve the situation quickly, because that was precisely what they were known for doing. At this time, the problem did not resolve. The hunts expanded in scale and intensity, becoming more organised and more coordinated, spreading across wider areas and involving efforts that began to resemble military operations rather than traditional hunting. Lines of men moved systematically through forests, dogs were deployed in increasing numbers, and the countryside was searched with a thoroughness that left little untouched. And yet, despite all of this, the attacks continued. If the most experienced hunters in France could not kill this animal, then the question was no longer simply how to stop it, but what exactly they were dealing with. By mid-1765, the pressure had intensified to the point where the Crown escalated its response further, sending a royal huntsman into the region. Francois Antoine arrived not only as a hunter, but as a symbol of authority. His presence intended to demonstrate that this was no longer a regional issue, but a matter of national importance. He carried with him the weight of expectation, and perhaps more importantly, the need to succeed where others had failed. Because by this stage, the story had begun to turn not only against the beast, but against those who had been unable to stop it. The hunts conducted under Antoine were relentless, marked by a level of precision and determination that had been absent before, and eventually they produced a result that appeared to bring the entire ordeal to a close. In September of 1765, a large wolf was killed near the Abbeylands, an animal that, by all accounts, was enormous by local standards. When it was examined, measured and displayed, it seemed to align closely enough with the descriptions that had been circulating to satisfy those who were eager for an ending. A body had been produced, and with it came the declaration that the beast had been killed and the problem solved. Officially, the crisis was over. The animal was sent to court, witnesses were brought forward, and statements were taken in an effort to solidify the conclusion. And for a brief moment, the fear that had gripped the region began to ease. People wanted it to be over. And perhaps more than that, they needed it to be over. And so the official narrative was accepted. But the relief did not last, because the attacks began again. Not immediately, and not in a way that could be easily acknowledged, but gradually, with incidents that mirrored what had come before, first isolated, then repeated, until it became impossible to ignore the pattern that was re-emerging. At first there was confusion, followed by denial, and then something more difficult to confront. Because if the beast had already been killed, then whatever was responsible for these new attacks could not be explained in the same way. Officials, having declared the problem solved, were not in a position to reverse that declaration without admitting a broader failure, and so reports became quieter, less public, and less urgent. The narrative that had been constructed was maintained, even as events on the ground began to contradict it. The countryside did not share that silence, because people were still being attacked, and people were still dying. By 1766, the crisis had shifted once again, moving away from the national spotlight and back into something that was treated as a local issue. Not because it had ended, but because acknowledging it no longer aligned with the story that had already been told. And in that space between what was happening and what was being officially recognised, something else began to take shape. Stories. Not the kind that were printed, but the kind that were passed between people, shaped by experience rather than documentation, and sustained not by proof, but by repetition and belief. Because when something refuses to behave in the way it should, when it continues beyond the point where it is meant to end, the human mind does not simply discard the problem, but reshapes it into something that can be understood. Some began to argue that the wrong animal had been killed, that what Antoine had brought down was nothing more than a wolf, albeit an unusually large one, and that the true cause of the attacks had never been identified. Others suggested that there had never been a single creature at all, and that the entire narrative had been built on a simplification that made the situation easier to communicate and control, when in reality there were multiple animals operating across the region, their actions blending together in one continuous story. There was another idea that persisted, quieter than the others, but far more unsettling: the possibility that it was still the same creature. Because behaviour had not changed, the patterns of attack remained consistent, the precision and targeting unchanged, and the way that the animal appeared and disappeared across the countryside suggested a familiarity with the land that went beyond instinct. And then there were accounts from those who had encountered it more than once, hunters who had tracked it, followed it, and come close enough to sense that something about it did not align with what they understood of animals. Some of those chose not to speak about their experiences publicly, but in private. They described details that did not fit easily within a natural explanation. They spoke about the way it seemed to avoid traps consistently, not through chance, but in a manner that suggested recognition, and about how it changed direction unexpectedly, appearing in places it should not have been able to reach so quickly. And always, there was that same detail that refused to disappear from the accounts. They had hit it, and it kept moving. By 1767, the hunts had changed in tone, no longer driven by confidence, but by persistence, as though those involved were continuing not because they expected success, but because they had no other option. The final chapter of this story does not begin with the crown or with its appointed hunters, but with a man from the region itself, Jean Chastel, who took part in the hunt organised by the Marquis d'Accia. On June 19, 1767, he fired, and this time the animal did not rise again. The creature that was brought down was large and was examined with a level of care that reflected the weight of what it was believed to represent. Its body was measured and described in detail in what would later be known as the Marin Report. which identified it as a wolf, though one that was described as unusual, even extraordinary. It bore scars that suggested it had survived previous encounters, old wounds that hinted at a history of pursuit, and it was presented to the public as the answer to everything that had come before. People came in large numbers to see it, to look directly at the thing that had shaped their lives for 3 years, and to decide for themselves whether this was truly the end. Officially it was. The attack stopped, the reports stopped, and the story was closed. But what remained was not simply the body of an animal, nor even the memory of what had happened, but the pattern that had defined it all. An animal that hunted in daylight, ignored livestock, and chose human victims. A creature described as a wolf, but never fully recognised as one. Something that could be shot, and yet continue.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Have you ever been stuck on a weight loss plateau, trying everything and anything you can to lose that extra weight and reach peak health? We've all been there, but Noom's unlocked the secret to reaching the mountaintop. Go in micro. The Noom GLP-1 microdose program starts at $79 and is delivered to your door in 7 days. Start your microdose GLP-1 journey today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Noom. Micro changes, big results. Initial 3-week subscription and 4 weeks of medication from $79 plus tax and $179 per month plus tax for 12-week subscription thereafter. Final pricing depends on program selection. Noom GLP-1 RX program involves healthy diet, exercise, and support. Individual results may vary. Meds and personalization based on clinical need. Not reviewed by FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality. No affiliation with Novo Nordisk Inc., the only U.S. source of FDA-approved semaglutide. Not available in all 50 U.S. states.
This is a phenomenal story. I think I didn't include it in there, but I think it was about 80 people or so that actually this wolf creature killed. And it just doesn't sound realistic, does it? Because, generally wolves don't attack humans. I know there are spates of it when they're really hungry and stuff like that, but I think generally they will then hunt in a pack. I could be wrong. But the villagers, everybody was obviously terrified. And I love the way that these big men came in. The big old hunters, like, yeah, we'll get it, the king's hunters. And they didn't. They thought they did. And then nobody was allowed to talk about it. Because, no, it's been caught, it's been dealt with. It's just like, shush, peasants. But it got to the point where it couldn't be denied that there was still something going on. This is, quite an infamous story, but I really wanted to cover it and share it with you guys because I think it's great. I think there was talk once of reintroducing wolves back in the UK. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think I love it. I do love it. But I'm also like, ooh, no, because there's been many times that I thought I was going to get terrorised by a wolf. And they're not in this country. And I was still like, I'm going to be eaten by wolves. Well, that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you again tomorrow for the haunted episode. Take care, everyone.
Youth mental health is a complex challenge that requires comprehensive solutions. We must strengthen after-school programs. We must make digital literacy tools available in our schools. We must work with mental health professionals to support children. And we must empower mentors, educators, and parents to keep kids happy. Learn more about our commitment to finding lasting solutions at empowerourfuturecoalition.com/solutions. Paid for by the Coalition to Empower Our Future.
Okay, caller 1 wins courtside seats to tonight's game.
What? I won floor seats?
You did.
I've been calling for 13 months.
Wait, Chris?
Yes, I finally did it.
What are you going to wear?
Men's Warehouse. They've got today's looks for any occasion, and I need to look like a celebrity.
Don't want to stick out.
Exactly. They've got Chill Flex by Kenneth Cole, Joseph Abboud, and a tailor at every store for the perfect fit.
Congrats. You can stop calling now.
Not a chance.
Get any look for every occasion at Men's Warehouse. Love the way you look.
This is brought to you by Colgate Total Active Prevention. Some routines make perfect sense, like securing your seatbelt before driving. Just as buckling up helps prevent injury, using Colgate Total helps prevent oral health problems like cavities and gingivitis before they start. So put yourself in the driver's seat of your oral health and prevent problems before they start with Colgate Total Active Prevention. Available at a retailer near you.
The stories told on the Whispering Woods are inspired by historical records, witness reports, and local folklore. While every effort is made to research and represent events accurately, some details, names, and locations may differ from official accounts or have been changed out of respect for those involved. These episodes are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes, and should not be considered definitive fact or investigative journalism.